In a world of fractured stories, timelines buried, and truths erased, one project dares to ask the question, what if everything you thought you knew about history was wrong? This is GTR, Genesis, Timeline and Roots. A 5,025-year simulated walkthrough tracing a melanated Adam back to 4000 BC. Over the last decade, new revelations confirm a black origin for humanity, from European vaults to tribal memory, Babylon to Britain. This is not just history, this is a challenge, a simulation, a movement. Meet the man behind GTR, Dr. Wilton Macdonald II, Caymanian, British, Jamaican, Haplogroup E and stateless for 26 years. Now a global explorer, 119 countries and counting. A hedge fund lawyer, a UK chartered accountant, a seeker of the lost archives of our people. But the question remains, if all black people came out of Africa, does that make us only African? Or are we also European, Scottish, Native American, Jacobite Hebrew, Asian? GTR exists to answer that question. You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. A splinter in your mind. That splinter has brought you here, to GTR. Whites can't trace their roots before the 1800s. Where's ours? Where are the tribes? The languages, the kings, the queens, the true Hebrews? Where did the giants go? Where are the Neanderthals? Angels, aliens? Why do we speak in so many tongues? Was Babel just a myth? A memory? History has holes. Hollywood has lied. The system was never made for us to remember. Only 5 to 8% of people today are white. And what about the 1800 stories and postcards of the cabbage babies? But nearly all history books center their story. That doesn't add up. Atlantis, lost cities, vanished civilizations, or were they erased? Try GTR. Take the red pill and awaken to the truth of your ancestors. Or take the blue pill and keep dreaming a fantasy. GTR. A simulated walkthrough of Black Hebrew history and eschatology. This is the beginning of remembering.
Well, hello, Cayman. This is your host, Dr. Wilton Macdonald, and this is GTR episode 8. And I will be presenting the Haplogroup Rs and providing a bit of news. I call it GTR news, and a real-life illustration in how GTR can assist. GTR exists not just to tell a story of the melanated planet and to help to whitewash history. GTR exists in order to help, again, create a framework for us to understand this history. I say, just as how you would compose an essay, first you need to do an outline. This is the historical timeline from which we ought to assess every topic under the sun. GTR also helps at helping people connect with roots, the genealogy aspect. I have been exploring my own family tree, and I would encourage others to do the same. And wherever possible, people reach out to me, and I will help them to better understand their family trees in light of connectivity to Europe. And I know some folks may be disappointed because Europe indeed was a melanated place 200 years ago. I know it seems incredulous. I know it seems far-fetched to just the average person. But if you read and test those primary sources, and I'm not just talking about what's in the average textbook, because God knows I am now pursuing yet another course at the 13th university. And I enjoy being a lifelong student. I enjoy reading. I enjoy researching. And it's just fascinating the things that you would, come across in dealing with, say, secret societies, in dealing with the esoteric, dealing with things that are not covered in books, the occult. And it's just an eye-opener when people are coming forward like Guy Anderson, who is a third-generation Mason, when he comes forth and he's talking about things as, the cages that were used to transport white children to South Africa, to Australia, to New Zealand. And these were not just adults. These were babes, toddlers, and kids in small pens and cages that they were sent to those places, which today we know whites are not indigenous to New Zealand, to Australia, to South Africa, and they attribute their history to Europe. But this is it. We have to keep pressing the primary sources. So a bit of GTR news, and I am there. Did you see on the screen? This is what's covered in the last episode. Sir John Macdonald. Sir John Alexander Macdonald, the first Prime Minister of Canada, born in 1815. And yes, he was Scottish. And yes, my Aunt Mabel, at around age 10, somewhere around 1948 to 1950, my Aunt Mabel had a few meetups with Daniel, my paternal great-grandfather, who I never met because he died, before my father came to age. I mean, my father was born in 1945, and he never really recalled fully Daniel. I think he really passed really shortly after my Aunt Mabel, met him. Mabel is an older child, so she's older than my dad by about 3-4 years. So it is that Mabel saw Daniel, and this Sir John Alexander Macdonald reminded her, and she remembered the nose, the outline of the face, not necessarily the color, but based on what even my grandfather, who was passed, my dad's dad, William Edward Macdonald, and how he was his priority was just to find the best, lady in town, and of course he'd prefer someone who would not, would give him, say, kids with good hair. He had that mentality. And so what was it in his family? What was going on with him and his genealogy? Something changed. And so we understand the Caribbean that it is the people who are mixed race must have been mixed because the males were dominant and they were white. And this is not what I am seeing. What I'm seeing from the genealogy and the records, and we'll go into that in a minute, is that the predominant cases, the males were black. There were leaders, were global, landlords, were nobles. And it's not the case that, and I think this will help to eliminate and cut back on, say, white guilt, because a lot of it is thrown at the doorsteps of, and this is a gift that I'm presenting, because a lot of, melanated all blacks today say, well, naughty, you have tales of Thomas Thistlewood and the ghastly things that were done and committed by whites to blacks. And so there's the cry for reparations, and we need to have just desserts. But what I'm finding is that the colonizers were melanated black. The leaders, the nobles, those who put the pieces in place to change the world during the 1800s, which I say would be the 800s, would be melanated men, those who Masonic, otherwise, but certainly black men, who put in motion this whole chain of events to conduct the cloning, whatever was done to produce different races. All of this was fairly new, and this was during that period, the 1800s, or I would say 800s. So this prime minister, whose face my aunt, saw on the currency, on the currency when she moved and migrated to Canada. So, oh my God, that is Daniel. That is Daniel. that requires probing. And it's unfortunate that this Sir John Alexander Macdonald apparently doesn't have any living males. This is the problem that I'm seeing here. That is the same thing in the case of the Honorable William Hugh Macdonald, as far as direct living males for DNA testing, for Y testing, because men, we have the Y chromosome, women just do not. So a man, and why a lot of scientists, you read the reports, when they find a skeleton, they're quick to just go right to the maternal line. And I say to myself, but that's a male. Why would you do that? You have a direct laser focused, a direct shot up the chain to an ancestor, and only men carry the Y chromosome. And so you have a direct link to the very beginning, but they often just say, well, we don't have enough evidence. We have good maternal DNA here, so we're going to trace that. And modern day Jews, modern day Israel, if you get the license, because it's illegal to even test in Israel today. In some countries, it's like they don't permit. I had to get a license to even conduct and import a test in Aruba, tied to the Netherlands. And then France, they have issues too. They don't talk about race. And I got some problems in just doing some tests there. So there are countries, even India. I'll go to India trying to trace my mom's roots, and I have major pushback. They have a criminal database where they're now, setting up for tracing, but they generally do not, engage in testing there in India. So it is in some parts in the Middle East as well, where they're conservative. And this deprives us of further research and discovery, because we want to explore. I certainly am thirsty and hungry for this information to just explore the roots, not just of McDonald's, but other connected persons of color, because the claim is, we derive their names from our masters. And that's just a flat out lie. I just don't see that happening. Even the McDonald's, you had maybe two prominent slave owners, and we don't even know for sure what their color was, because what I'm seeing is that the patriarchy would be melanated, would be black, and that makes more sense. If you look at the haplogroups E, if you look at those who connect with Scotland and Europe, it's not, they ours. So in the news today, GTR news, I wanted to just, again, touch base on a few items, but certainly for Sir John Alexander Macdonald, if this is the case, or we don't know his haplogroup, and there's no way of, unless you open some graves, which I have been, tasked with that years ago, but if graves can be found and we could analyze suitable DNA for any surviving males. There are a few males. He had sons and they had sons, but the chain is cut off because those sons then had daughters. And, the trail on the Y chromosome is cold and you don't have living descendants. But if he turned out to be, say, an R and having a white father, a grandfather, then it's just assumed now, because of the features, that he would have had a real maternal, true black Macdonald, and that on the mom's line, it would be still a connected Macdonald. And so it is that those NPEs, those non-paternal events, that they're quick to assign, because you're sub-Saharan, you're E, they could work then the other way. They will, in fact, work the other way, that those that are white would then derive names from black males, from in this case, true black Macdonalds. So in the news, I've seen where you have the Bayeux Tapestry. And I mentioned that the Bayeux Tapestry is found in a place called Bayeux in France. And I called them a few times last year, not to harass. I mean, I would not just harass, but you could see in the website that this museum is closed until October of 2027. And they have in the Bayeux this tapestry of the Norman conquest. And they are telling people, well, this is how it was. And you could see that alongside in the screen, this piece of the tapestry is there. It's literally a mile long. It's that long. Whereas the Moorish quadrille occupies just a short space, but you could see there are 4 riders from melanated Europe, 4 riders covering Germany, Sweden, Poland, Lithuania in the year 1706, or rather 706. And the Bayeux portray people fighting the Normans versus the Britons. And you could see the color, you could see it on screen, that these are all white, all Caucasian men fighting in 1066, the glorious conquest and the Norman conquest, William the Conqueror in 1066, pre-Magna Carta, because that was 1215. And this is the history set in stage between France and the UK. And that's the history that we were taught. But as I said, I fall back on my words that the Middle Ages were never dark. They were just largely made up. Now, the periods here we're talking about 1066, it's kind of pushing it, because that to me reminds me of an invasion. Britain was invaded in the first century, and if the historians are in the room and they recall, that was a Roman invasion where the Romans went into Britain. They tried to fight the Picts, the Pictish people. And then they lost legions, thousands of soldiers, of Romans, of Black Romans. And we know from the prior episode, what the Romans looked like. You could just go to Cardiff, Wales, and you could see that they have large noses, curly hair. You could see on the day, they didn't blow that up. They didn't deface that. They didn't take off the faces. And I am so tired of counting the thousands of images in North Africa, in Algeria, in Tunisia, in Ceuta, in Morocco, all over, even in Poland, where one of those princes in the same Moorish quadrille painting, I visited the castle, and the oldest part of the chapel, there were 8 pillars. And of the 8 pillars, the faces were removed. Yet every part of the body, every part of that pillar was largely intact. This is 300-400 years old. And he lived there. And it's on the Polish border near to Ukraine. And it's south of Warsaw. I visited and I saw all 8, not one survived. And that's a problem. Why is it that all these thousands of images, including the Great Sphinx, even this TikToker, I show speed, this guy is getting a lot of Chicago, teenager who's getting a lot of, views, and he's pointing out, say, what happened to the nose? He's going around Egypt. What happened to the face there? And he's asking the obvious question. And they're saying, they have no explanation. I just laughed how the people in Egypt, the Egyptians, who largely are just racist, to be honest, because they don't even think they're African. And I've been to Egypt a number of times, and it's just ghastly. But they tried to ban that movie Cleopatra that Jada Smith tried to produced, and they had 70,000 signatures saying Cleopatra was not a Black queen. They'd rather have a white person play, which we know was Elizabeth Taylor, and that's an old movie, an old goodie, as they say, and it's okay for Cleopatra to be portrayed as white. And this is again well into the ancient Roman times. This is well within 1,000. They say 2,000 years ago. It's about 1,000 years ago. So this is within the Roman times, the Roman Empire, and Egypt was just a satellite. It was a conquered nation within the larger Roman Empire. And what color we found? We know what the Romans looked like. Go to Wales, go take a trip, go on a plane, go to Wales, and the castle, it's not going to be obvious. You have to navigate around the gift shop and go downstairs in the basement, but it's there. It's clear as day what they look like. Big noses, thick lips, curly hair, all in Roman attire, in armor, on chariots, etched in stone, verified by historians to be accurate. Even nameplates on the wall say these are legions of Roman legionnaires. And the date, the 1st century. So this Norman conquest is Bayeux, and I don't know what they're doing between now. In fact, this was closed from last year. I wasn't aware of it, but this museum was closed. And maybe just shortly after I started calling, and they stopped taking my calls and probably felt harassed. And I just said to them, the last thing I said to the assistant is, couldn't you reach the museum curator? I said, this doesn't make any sense. I said, if this is to be believed, this mile-long toilet paper, and that's what I call it, toilet paper, the Bayeux Tapestry, then how come we only have a minority, barely 8%? Even if you say round it to 10% of whites today, why don't we have more? Because it's not that, these people, it was existing and other people were not. They were dominant. And they claim China was such old civilization, yet there's evidence of Black people living in China just a few hundred years ago, literally 300 years, Black people living in China. And then they would, disguise certain things and make it into animal dragon faces. But the noses are big, the mouths are big. And they say this done to scare people. But Asia was melanated and not really talked about in really history. They were, say, a closed community, yet they were so, great in numbers. I will have another session in discussing, the numbers and the stats in the time of Christ. So for this to be believed, I just don't buy it. And the tapestry is still up. I don't know what will be revealed in October of 2027, but I'm sort of happy that that they closed the exhibit, because they made a lot of money. They're telling the story about the world, and no one's buying it. Here it is that the Dresden Museum of Ethnology, it's still open for now. They admitted that they had the Morse Quadrille, the painting that you see in the background, my background, which I paid for. I paid for the print. They have the license to display it. And that's the Dresden Museum of Ethnology in Germany. So I called them up and rang them and said, hey, what about this painting? Was it really on display? Is it now on display? Oh, no, it was only shown for a very, very brief moment in time. They didn't tell me the exact dates, but it's now in archives. It's in storage. And I said, is there anything similar, any other relics? Because according to you have 90,000 artifacts, 90,000 in this museum. And when I asked that question, the lady hung up, disconnected the phone. So I didn't bother calling back. But you see, that's the thing. I got a massive protest and opposition calling Bayou, and then calling the Dresden Museum. Next, what should I call the British Museum? There is a painting in the British Museum, by the way, and I will share that in my next episode at 9, when I discuss pirates, the real pirates of the Caribbean. This episode 8 is just looking at news, GTR news, and also the Haplogroup Rs, which I will go through in a moment. So this is sort of the news. Now, further news updates is that photography. I noticed that there's a lot of photos posted in genealogy sites, My Heritage, Ancestry, across the board. People need to realize that I posted it on Facebook, and people could check the social media feeds, that photography, commercial photography, was not available until the mid to 1850s, 1860s, 1870s, depending on when persons could access and have money, because you had early images captured, but those were exploratory and experimental. When you see photographs and people have the stuff that's posted like gospel as to how people look, because that's the story they're telling. They're telling the story of whites in history, which would replace blacks, and they have replaced our history, especially concerning Europe. That Europe was indeed melanated. So they would have paintings, they would have portraits, and then they have some photography. But bear in mind, the commercial photography was really only available from the 1850s, 1860s, or I'd say 850s, 860s. And again, this is the reason why we explore and study GTR. Now, Richard Phelan Thompson, and this is along the Thompson line. We have, and I've done more than 50,000 names in Cayman, and it connects in Jamaica. You can see there the flags. Where there's a Caucasus link, where there's non-European, I would put the Caucasus type flag, a flag that symbolizes the Caucasus, non-Europe, Jamaican flag. In this example, this tree, you would see the Cayman flag, and some of the Bodden, Jackson, even Thompson line. And I was contacted by this gentleman, Malcolm, and I will show you his tree just in a second. And he was asking me the question, how do you connect to the Thompson family? And I said to him, well, I am connecting through the Stone family. And I will just read it out to you. So the Stone family is connected to Grimmer. And Grimmer is based in New Zealand. That is a family that, again, cuts off from the mid-1800s. And there's no really link from, 1800s. There's the Grimmer family goes back from New Zealand, touches on England, bits of Scotland, but then stops somewhere the mid-1800s. And the family that connects to the Thompsons, which apparently had some connection to England, was the Stone, the last name being Stone, the Stone family. So I was just talking about the Malcolm Grimmer family, and the reason why we help people in GTR. This person contacted me and asked for some assistance in connecting up the family tree from New Zealand to the Cayman Islands. So this gentleman has family roots, but it's really, it cuts off, around the, let's say, mid-1800s. this John Alfred Grimmer from London. Now, he's white. I don't know about being from London, England. Again, we could say the origins, whites in Europe, it's just unknown, but that's where they claim this paternal link, John Alfred, was from in the mid-1800s. Now, the connection to Thompson, it was through the Stone family. So we have Roseanne Stone, 1863. We have her father, which was Benjamin. And then we go to Joseph. We have Joseph Stone, who was married to Elizabeth Lizzie Thompson. She had a number of husbands, but certainly she was a Thompson from England. And we have William George Thompson being her father. Her mother was Elizabeth Townsend. And Charles was the grandfather. And then there's a connection to a John Henry Thompson of the Cayman Islands. But after that, it kind of gets a little murky because John Henry's father was an Andrew Thompson without the P, Thompson, and we don't have any connection. I've looked at this line before in Cayman, and there's no valid connection to Europe, as you know, many whites in the Caribbean. They would argue that their roots would be from Europe, but there's really little DNA tracing. And the ones that I have met up with would be Haplogroup R, and the Haplo Rs definitely have limited connections with Europe or with any country really prior to the 1800s or 800s. As I said before, you have to establish those goalposts. And they always say, well, you're black, so you're backward. And then the reason why they inserted the Middle Ages to stretch out the timeline. And that was deliberate. So we created this, so they created this 1,000 years from 582 to 1582. And they just made it up. And they created this fancy, entertaining kind of history. And some things would have to be collapsed into a new and adjusted timeline. And so that's you know what happened. And so we cannot really trace some of this history. I will dive right now into discussing Haplogroup Rs. So again, ladies and gentlemen, the story and what we are told is that the whites were dominant from the time of Christ, coming all the way up through the Middle Ages and the Age of Enlightenment, and blacks kind of found their way, coming down from trees and being, you know, not sophisticated and having to be pulled up because we were taken from Africa, which remains a very backward place, and that's our home. That's our home, and so that's the narrative. What I'm finding out is the haplogroups, the DNA haplogroups A, B, C, D, E. Original mankind being melanated man. And on the other end, those that you'd say attributed to the meadow cabbage babies would be the typical haplogroup R with the O in the case of men. In the case of women, they have a different classification. So you have L, which is the original black woman, and then you have H. Even my wife, she's an H. That is on the other polar end, being meadow cabbage baby. In the middle, we have all sorts of hybrids. We have the J's, the G's. The J is associated with the Ashkenazi, which it's a made-up label, and Levant territory that doesn't even make sense and doesn't even exist, really. So you have these labels of haplogroups G and J and I. I seems to be popular because if you're not an E, if you're not an R, then you're somehow an I. And then S, which is the Aboriginal people, those are in the middle, just like even T and U and V and W and X, and I think they even have Z. So the two ends, we have to frame it up. It's like framing up a timeline. We frame up the DNA. And Dr. Jensen from Harvard, I mean, he is a scientist. He is a biologist and a biochemist. So he started with E. his oldest, the most populous group that even I fall in, the E, which should be the first and is the first. It even should precede A. So E, A, B, C, D in men. And that's it. Those are the original mankind classifications. And going back when? Going back again 5,026 years to BC 4000. And we are about 1,026 years from Christ. And Christ was, of course, melanated. Okay, not fair skin, but melanated. So let's jump to the discussion of the R's, because I spent all time in my own genealogy talking about the E's. So I want to discuss the R's. You have a relative of my dear wife, Christoph Patrick. So he is related to my wife's mother on that side of the family. Not the Sadursky side, but my wife's mother's cousin, and they share common ancestry. Haplogroup R, RL365. We have other R's that captured, and this is my wife's father, Arkadiusz Sadursky. He's an R, and it's RM198. And his mother's line was W. So even there, we have here that the maternal lines would not be H. So he had a mom of, I would call it, mixed ancestry. You go back to the first, we have a maternal T, not H. T is in the middle. So even here you have male progenitors, male haplogroup Rs, the typical whites. But for some reason, their mothers, in both cases, Christoph and Arkadiusz, they have mixed race, mixed DNA, and the middle category of mothers, the mother's lines, which T, again, and that was doing this W1. Let me go to the Macdonald. Now, what I have discovered is that the Macdonalds and the haplogroup Rs, this is a whole story. I have been researching this for years. And the question would be, who are the real Macdonalds? And I have created several posts. So we spent a lot of time talking about the E's, the original man, the original Jacobites, the original Black Hebrews, the original Scots, or E's for the most part. You may have found an A or a B or C. I went to New Zealand and clan chiefs in New Zealand of the Maoris, they are typed C and D. That would consider, they would be African. And that's an African Black classification, C and D. So wouldn't be surprised that I found others. I went to Aruba. Remember, I needed a license to get a test in. And recently this Stanislavs, and that's almost sounding Polish, but Stanislavs Junior MacDougall. MacDougall is an A. He's a haplogroup A. That would be the second box. After E comes A, and he's a confirmed haplogroup A. And he only has direct African matches. I believe there's at least one in the Middle East, but he has African matches. So we're going to just explore. What I've found here is that the E's are indeed the real Macdonalds, the real Jacobites, with the direct paternal connectivity from the Western Hemisphere, all back to Scotland and into Africa via the Middle East or Southern Europe. In my case, it's through Italy, linking back to the Black Jacobites and Hebrews. And the records show most opted or were forced to change their names to include surnames like Brown, Brownlee, Graham, Logan, Wiley, James, Henry, Davis, Davy, Black as a surname, Campbell, Collins, Peterson, Pedersen. And again, this is another observation. A lot of my Macdonald cousins, they migrated to the States, but a lot of them went to Spanish-speaking countries. Now, the catch and the problem here in tracing, a lot of those relatives, within the last 100, 150 years, they went to Panama, they went to Costa Rica, they went to, in parts of South America, near Suriname, they went to Belize, they went to Cuba, Dominican Republic. Now, the issue there is even Puerto Rico. When they take on their mother's name, which is common for a lot of Spanish-speaking people, they take their mother's name. That surname, the father's name, becomes lost eventually. It becomes acceptable as a middle name. So I tested this guy, Orlando Macdonald, with the M-A, Macdonald Brown. And another generation or two, Macdonald is maybe lost, doesn't think that it's necessary. Everyone knows him as a Brown, and they identify it as a Brown. And a lot of some of these cases in Henry, in James, in Graham, in Logan, I have seen the dropping, that surname being lost, and the persons are now being recognized by the maternal and mother's name. And so they are Macdonalds, but they just don't have the Macdonald name. And during the time there was slavery. Slavery did exist, but the question is, where did they get those slaves from? And I have doubts about so many coming from Africa. Not that they didn't bring people from Africa. I've seen and I've found evidence, and I'm convinced of it. I haven't been to Calabar, that a lot of blacks from Europe came into Africa, came into Calabar. And that's why today Calabar is the epicenter, and was the epicenter and first capital of Nigeria. And no one else has an explanation why Calabar would be the capital. So I wanted to go through the R's, because this whole episode is focusing on the haplogroup R's. So what about the R's? Haplogroup R's and the summary. I've tested more than 100 persons now, and a mix of all haplos, including G's. But let's focus on the R's, because these are the Macdonalds. I have featured myself because I have found around 45 when you're counting and accounting for the name change. So about 45% of my top matches on YFOL. YFOL is a scientific site. Just as how I showed the SNP tracker in the other episode, that timeline and reference between Africa to Scotland, that's a scientific site. You can Google it right now and just put in SNP SNP tracker, and you put in your DNA haplogroup if you've done a test, and it'll show you a pathway and migration from Africa. My case, it went from Africa, from Southern Europe, Middle East, into Scotland. So if you look at the summary, I've found that of the R's, Daniel Macdonald, he was haplogroup RFG-C, so he's an RFG, haplo R. Only 1 out of 12 matches, so made that 8%. Romaine Macdonald, RFT, only 6%, 6 matches out of 100. And this is on a scientific site. This is not your common mom, pop, ancestry, 23andMe type test. This is a deep whole genome testing that takes about 3 months to process. And only Y DNA. And this was submitted here in Poland at a private lab. Hugh Ferguson Macdonald. Now he's a direct descendant of the Honorable, or as they call it, Reverend Hugh Macdonald. I'll come to that. His paternal ancestor. The jury's out on the connectivity with the Honorable William Hugh Macdonald, which almost looked sort of mixed race. But again, we'll come to that. He's a confirmed, and Hugh is a confirmed. He goes by the name Fergus. He's a confirmed haplogroup R, and that would be RZ. I've found that out of 100, there were 2 different tests done, the SNP test and the STR test. There were 0 matches with the SNPs. That's of Macdonalds. These are matches with other Macdonalds. 0%. And on the STR test, that would be 3 out of 509, which is less than 1%. We have Nicholas Macdonald, which is RY. 0%, 0 Macdonald matches. Ricardo Macdonald, St. Mary, 0. We have Damien Macdonald, born in Canada, haplogroup R, RY, that's 0%. Martin, born in Grenada, RFT, 0. Ramon Macdonald in the Dominican Republic, 0. And Ian Macdonald from Portland, Jamaica, RFT, on the first test was 0% out of 17, and on the second, 0 out of 540. So I will just go through and show you quickly some of the results. And you're looking here at actual live imagery in WIFO, the scientific database. So these are the names. First, I'm looking at Hugh's results. You go through it and you could see for yourself their names like Peters and Ferguson and Fowler. Macdonald is just not there. Going through again for the record, let it show. I mean, you have something close, McDermott, but not Macdonald. And this is again a haplogroup R, as I say, a real Macdonald. And that's where I have marked him as someone who's connected again to Jamaica. And here I have Ian Macdonald's matches. You can see that there are some matches here with other names like Ferguson, Sinclair. And Sinclair, there are matches on my side, which are white-looking men. George Sinclair, I've made a post on that, and he had a large nose as well, fair skin from Westmoreland, and he was a haplogroup E. So the Sinclairs I found mostly are E's. That's an old French name. Then the chap that I said was a haplogroup R, I threw it in here. He has an Algerian Cameroon match. He's haplogroup A, and he is a Stanislaus Macintosh. Then we have my group. I just, for base of comparison, I just put in my group E, which just shows my matches. And if you account for the name changes, they're significant and they're Macdonald. I have actual about 4, 5 actual Macdonald matches, like real life Macdonalds. Here you have Nicholas. He didn't have any matches. Romeo. Now, the thing with Romeo is that Romeo is an RCLD. And again, I will discuss this in a moment because this is the King Somerled match. According to the fables and the history and the myth, Somerled was this famous Scottish king and lord in the 12th century. And he had a grandson called Donald, and the son of Donald, son of Donald, then would declare himself to be the first Macdonalds and Group R. But they could not find his ancestry. They couldn't find his real paternal links and his who he was, where he came from, origins unknown. And that I will deal with just in a quick second. But Romeo has very, very few matches, but not a whole lot. I mean, he has a few, not more than 4. So as far as 4 direct matches to Macdonald's. There's Romaine, another haplogroup R. There's Daniel Macdonald, not my Daniel, but a Daniel Macdonald haplogroup R. There's Damien. There's Damien again. Martin from Grenada. Martin again. And that's Martin. Ramon has no matches, from Dominican Republic. Ricardo Macdonald. Then we have Hugh. So putting a face to the name, this is Hugh who tested, and this would be his ancestors. Up to his father was William, and his grandfather was Fitzcharles, and then the Reverend Hugh on his paternal side. This is his family tree, and it's Scottish. Another picture of Hugh, his father, and the grandfather, and the great-grandfather. So again, the patriarch of the Macdonalds, and one of the patriarchs. But I had discussions with other genealogists and friends, and the problems again that faced about the Macdonalds matching. And here I have to stick a pin. So this gentleman is meant to be the patriarch, and I'm saying, well, there's not much matching going on. There's either 0 or 4% or 6%. There's not a lot matching with other Macdonalds. Here it is that is described that Oxford has done a study, and they looked at the Somerled DNA, and they concluded that Somerled, ancient Scottish person, was a haplogroup R. and say they tested him. That's what they claimed. Now, I exchanged notes with proper researchers, and they were just telling me about the connectivity of the R's. When I say that the R's don't match each other, and this is coming from another James who runs one of the DNA sites at Family Tree DNA. And it goes on to say that there's only one high-level question on R1A, not really started from R1B. For the R1A North Somerled line, the remaining question is resolution of DNA lines for this Kepach and Duniveg and the Glen's original R1A Antrim chiefs. The paper lines are iffy. Not too solid, but they're iffy. They most certainly are, and agree that Duniveg matches Antrim as a paper claims. The DNA of the big Ys, Duniveg, Antrim, descend from the same son of John, first Lord of the Isles, and this contradicts the historical paper trails. I consider that most likely problem is that the Kepach paper trails, paper across the sea, is wrong, but it's just a feeling based on the stats of the number in common with autosomal matches. On a different subject, please note, looking at Macdonald, McDougall, McAllister, confirmation that Somerled really was Y at chromosome, ancestor of John, first Lord of the Isles. You should consider the case of MacKetchern, which the historical paper or oral tradition comes from close Y ancestor of Somerled. What is seldom discussed is that it's actually probable that at least a few tests of medieval DNA would turn up the address. Eventually, science is clearly correct, beyond doubt. The rest of the story is circumstantial. I do not think it be proven beyond all doubt. I'd be happy for beyond reasonable doubt. Greatest problem is that the sons that are then tied to the founders of the clans are unlisted in the Chronicles of Man. There are a few references to names that have been marked as possible, and some people in documents, is only one document written 100 years after the births, when the sons are clearly identified. All the documents have different biases. Chronicles of Holyrood and those of Montrose are clearly anti-Somerled. The Chronicles of Man are clearly very biased towards Somerled offspring described in this document. To change my view would take new evidence. DNA from a body that has the same injuries as one of medieval accounts recovered in a believable location would be the absolute best evidence. Unless his body was reunited with his head, because according to the tale, Somerled literally lost his head, but just the skull, as there is no evidence, no description of his size or any deformity, this would still prove beyond doubt. The other would be new documents that confirm the Chronicles of Man are clearly from an independent source. I think it might be likely to happen. Unlike you said, again, Douglas, like this, so people are agreeing, yeah. So, and when I spoke to other persons surrounding this person, they said that there was a lot of illegitimate children that was sort of born. The line I just see terminated somewhere after the late 1700s. I just can't confirm anything beyond this John Allen. Now we're turning to the Reverend Hugh's brother, and his name was the Honorable William Hugh Macdonald, born in 1816. Now, of all the persons on that line, he was one guy that jumped up and decided to go to Jamaica, and he died in Jamaica. And this was, again, you could see from the profile, someone who has some bushy hair. There's another image I've seen of him, and he has definitely a little more ruddy skin. They said he was married to a black woman, or mixed race black woman. And there's some questions asked about some of the ancestors. Some of the kin would include Herbert DeLorme MacDonald. And that person along this William Hughes line had illegitimate children. So there's just some discussion about this person who died in St. Mary, not sure about his genetic pathway, if he's directly related to Hugh's ancestor, the Reverend Hugh. But this person, like Sir John Macdonald, the first Prime Minister of Canada, he has no direct relatives. Here you have a picture of his wife. And her name was Anne Cocking, and daughter of Ralph Cocking and Eliza Gray Bigham. And this is a chap, Herbert George DeLorme, who is related. That was the grandson of the Honorable William Hugh Macdonald. Ronald was his son, born in Jamaica. And we have no living male relatives. That's the problem. And this chap looks a little fair-skinned, mixed race, definitely. We have a living relative, which is Karen K. Moody. She lives in the States, born 1942. And she is still alive, but the problem is that we don't have living descendants, and that's a problem. So we go back, and I'm plagued by the Sir John story, because like Sir John Macdonald, who looked like my actual great-grandfather, Daniel, there are no living male descendants. And no living male descendants of the Honorable William Hugh Macdonald. So I'm haunted by the image and the fact that we can't confirm the DNA for neither of these men, Sir John Macdonald and the Honorable William Hugh Macdonald. All right, putting a face to a name. This is Damien Macdonald, Haplogroup R, with very little to zero matches, McDonald's. You can see this Damien. This would be Daniel, born in the States. Like, again, very few matches, the actual McDonald's. And these are all Haplogroup Rs. Tonight, I'm telling the Haplogroup R story. Another for Daniel Romaine, born in Jamaica, in St. Elizabeth. His lines, I mean, I'd say Caucasus because I can't trace them back to Scotland or Europe. Again, another Haplogroup R. Romeo, the person with the rock star DNA, Summerled, RCLD 50. Have mercy. A few matches, but nothing, beyond the 6%. It's tiny considering that he has the rock star haplo for Summerled, which is a variant in the R, but it's RCLD Romeo, born in Jamaica. We have Nicholas MacDonald. And funny enough, the only MacDonald that match up with the Hugh Macdonald that I featured, it's this chap, this Nicholas, born in St. Elizabeth, and Nicholas shares DNA with him. So obviously they had white paternal grandfathers, but none of the other Macdonalds are matching up with Hugh. Again, Nicholas again, who I met in person, St. Elizabeth. Ricardo Macdonald, another R. Again, very, very few matches. Martin, all the way in Grenada. And Martin, again, has very few matches. Ramon has 0 matches. He's all the way in Dominican Republic. 0. Ian Macdonald, born in Jamaica. Again, not having very many matches to consider. So near 0. So yeah, back to recycled and back to Hugh. So I was thinking that Hugh would have led me to some moment of truth, because I am speaking to another genealogist, that's Anne Thornley Brown, who has connectivity with this Lorne Macdonald. And there were just some issues raised because of illegitimate children, and I was hoping that I would be led to a path of truth and seeing more connectivity. I just can't find the links. So who is a rightful Macdonald? We can go and play this game forever. And it's a game that is not enjoyable or funny. But this is the man whose DNA I was after. But I can't really say what he was because of the questions raised. Even if you look at the Honorable William Hugh and look at the Reverend, do you see even a facial resemblance match? I mean, they have these wicked sideburns kind of going on, but the other images I've seen of the Honorable William Hugh clearly has a darker skin, and I mean, he's a fair skinned looking man, but the fact remains is that, we don't have a direct male ancestor for the Honorable William Hugh. So I will leave it there, and I will pick up on episode 9 on the pirates, the real pirates of the Caribbean. Thank you very much. And this concludes episode 8, where I presented news on GTR and looking at the Haplogroup R's, the Haplogroup R McDonalds, and not finding any connectivity to Europe. I'm not finding any intra-class, intra-DNA subclade connectivity between the R McDonalds. And I've said it again many times, the E's do connect. When you do the commercial tests, we do not connect. But when you take that into the private labs that I've done, and you take an account for the name changes, then we do, in fact, indeed, connect. Thank you for listening. This is another GTR episode 8. Thank you. Good evening. Good night.
GTR Publishing.
A Data Dreads production.